Welcome, dear friends, to our channel of light and reflection. Today, we begin a profound journey through one of the most comforting and enlightening works of the Spiritist codification, Heaven and Hell, by Allan Kardec. Specifically, we are starting a 5-part series exploring the second part of this book, focusing on the transition of happy spirits and what Kardec calls the death of the just. For many, the word death still carries a weight of fear and uncertainty. However, the Spiritist revelation, through the direct testimonies of those who have crossed the veil, transforms this fear into hope. In Heaven and Hell, Kardec didn't just theorize, he interviewed the dead. He organized their reports into categories based on their moral state at the moment of their passing. Today, in this first part, we look at the highest category, the happy spirits. Who are they? Why is their transition so different from ours? The just person, in the Spiritist sense, is not necessarily someone who lived a life free of mistakes, but someone who lived a life of constant effort toward moral progress. They are those who practiced the law of love and charity, who sought to conquer their lower passions, and who used their earthly trials as tools for evolution. When we read Kardec's observations, we realize that for these spirits, the separation of the soul from the body is a gentle process. Imagine a fruit that, when perfectly ripe, detaches itself effortlessly from the branch. This is the death of the just, because they did not attach their hearts to material possessions or fleeting vanities. The fluidic ties that bind the perispirit to the physical body are already loose. There is no agony, no terror of the unknown. As the physical senses fade, the spiritual senses awaken. In the accounts provided in the book, we see that these spirits often begin to see their loved ones and spiritual protectors even before the final breath is drawn. They don't feel like they are ending. They feel like they are returning home after a long, productive journey. The peace they feel at the moment of death is the direct result of a clear conscience. Spiritism teaches us that the hell or heaven we find after death is nothing more than our own interior state reflected back at us. The happy spirit carries their heaven within them. In the next part of our series, we will dive into the specific case studies Kardec presents, looking at the actual words of those who returned to tell us, death has no sting. Thank you for joining me for this introduction. Reflect today on how you are ripening your own soul. Are you loosening your ties to the material world, or are you tightening them? Remember, the death of the just begins with the life of the just. I'll see you in part 2. Peace be with you. Welcome back to our study of Heaven and Hell by Allan Kardec. In our previous video, we introduced the concept of the happy spirits and why the transition we call death looks so different depending on how we live our lives. Today, we dive into the specific mechanics of the transition for a person who has lived justly, what Spiritism beautifully calls the death of the just. When we think of death, the common human instinct is fear. We imagine a struggle, a painful rupture, or a dark unknown. But Kardec, through the communications of higher spirits, shows us a completely different reality for those who have cultivated a life of goodness and emotional detachment from purely material interests. The just person is not someone who lived a life without mistakes, but someone who lived a life with purpose, seeking to fulfill the law of love and charity. For this individual, the process of disincarnation begins long before the heart stops beating. Think of the perispirit, the fluidic body that connects the soul to the physical shell. In a person deeply attached to sensory pleasures or material ego, these fluidic ties are like heavy, tight knots. But for the just person, these ties are already loose, because their thoughts and affections were consistently directed toward higher ideals. Their perispirit is lighter and less dense. Kardec explains that for the just, the separation is gradual and painless. It is often compared to a peaceful awakening from a deep sleep. There is no death agony in the spiritual sense. While the body may undergo its natural biological shutdown, the soul feels a sense of relief rather than trauma. Imagine a traveler who has been wearing a heavy, restrictive coat for a long journey. As the journey ends, they simply slip the coat off. There is no struggle, just a lightness that follows. This is the serenity of the righteous transition. But why is it so calm? It's because of the law of affinity. As the soul begins to detach, it is not greeted by darkness or coldness. Instead, it begins to perceive the presence of loved ones and protective spirits who have gone before. The transition is a reunion. The just soul doesn't feel lost because it has already built its heaven within its own conscience. In the second part of Heaven and Hell, Kardec shares several testimonies from spirits who experienced this. They describe the moment of transition as a sweet blurring of the senses, followed by a magnificent clarity. They don't see the grave, they see the horizon. As we reflect on this today, ask yourself, how am I weaving my fluidic ties today? Are they made of the heavy iron of attachment, or the light silk of service and peace? The death of the just is not a privilege granted to a few. It is the natural consequence of a life lived in harmony with the soul's true nature. In our next part, we will look at specific examples of these happy spirits and the messages they sent back to us through Kardec, revealing what they felt in those first few moments of being truly free. I'll see you in part 3. Welcome back as we continue our study of one of the most comforting chapters in Spiritist literature. Today, we delve into the third part of our journey through the death of the just, as recorded by Allan Kardec in the book Heaven and Hell. If you've been following this series, you know that transition is not a singular event that happens at the moment the heart stops. It is a process, and for the happy spirits, those who lived a life aligned with the laws of love and charity, this process is remarkably beautiful. In this segment, we are looking at why the transition for a righteous person is described as sweet and peaceful. Kardec explains that the ease of the soul's departure is directly proportional to the thinning of the links between the soul and the body during earthly life. Think of it this way: a person who is deeply attached to material possessions, ego, and physical sensations creates a heavy, fluidic bond. When death comes, that bond resists. But the just person, the one who has already begun to live for the spirit while still in the flesh, has already started the process of detachment. Their perispirit, the fluidic envelope of the soul, is lighter, more ethereal. In the case of the spirits Kardec interviewed, such as the famous spirit of Samson or the young woman mentioned in Chapter 2, they described the moment of death not as a rupture, but as a gentle fading of one reality and the soft dawning of another. There is no agony, no struggle for breath that translates into spiritual terror. Instead, there is a sensation of slipping into a restorative sleep, only to wake up feeling more alive than ever before. Why is this? Because for the just, the conscience is clear. The just person doesn't fear the judgment of God because they understand that God's law is written in their own conscience. They aren't looking back at what they are losing on earth. They are looking forward to the fulfillment of their spiritual journey. One of the most moving aspects of this chapter is the description of the welcoming committee. For the happy spirit, the transition is never a lonely path. While those on earth may be weeping around the bed, the spirit is being greeted by luminous beings, friends, and family members who preceded them. Kardec shows us that the just person experiences a sense of lightness. The weight of the physical body, which often feels like a heavy garment, is cast off effortlessly. They describe the vision of their own body not with horror, but with a detached gratitude, much like one looks at a suit of clothes that served its purpose and is no longer needed. In the next part of our series, we will look at the specific dialogues these spirits had with Kardec, revealing the immediate moments after they crossed the veil and what they felt as they realized they were truly free. Reflect on this today. Every act of kindness and every moment of detachment we practice now is a step toward making our own eventual transition a death of the just. I'll see you in Part 4. Peace and light to you all. As the final physical bond dissolves, a phenomenon occurs that many of us spend our entire lives wondering about. In the 4th chapter of Heaven and Hell, Allan Kardec describes the awakening of the righteous soul as a transition from a dense, foggy dream into a brilliant, clear morning. For the just, those who lived according to the law of love and charity, this moment is devoid of the traditional terrors of death. Imagine for a moment a traveler who has been on a long, exhausting journey through a foreign land. They are tired, their clothes are worn, and they have faced many storms. Suddenly, they reach the threshold of their true home. This is exactly how the happy spirit feels. As the eyes of the flesh close, the eyes of the soul open with a lucidity that is impossible to describe in our human languages. There is no confusion, no dark night of the soul, because their conscience is a bright lamp that lights the way. One of the most beautiful aspects Kardec highlights is the reception. We often fear that death is a solitary experience, but the Spiritist revelation assures us that for the virtuous, it is the ultimate reunion. The just person is not met by silence, but by the smiles of those they loved and lost. Can you visualize the joy of a mother embracing a child she hasn't seen in decades? Or the profound peace of being greeted by your spiritual guardian, the mentor who whispered intuitions of goodness into your ear during your most difficult days? For the happy spirit, these protectors are not strangers. They are familiar vibrations of love. The soul recognizes them instantly, not necessarily by their faces, but by the affinity of their hearts. There is a profound sense of belonging. They realize that every sacrifice made on earth, every time they chose forgiveness over revenge, and every silent act of kindness was a seed planted in this spiritual garden they are now entering. Kardec explains that the soul of the righteous man or woman detaches itself as a fruit falls when it is ripe. There is no tearing, no struggle. The body, which served its purpose as a temporary school, is left behind with a sense of gratitude, but without regret. The spirit feels a lightness, a freedom from the gravity of physical pain and the heaviness of material desires. If you are watching this and feeling a sense of peace, it's because your intuition knows this truth, that life does not end. It merely changes its vibration. The death of the just is actually their true birth. It is the moment they realize that the shadows of the world were temporary, but the light of their good deeds is eternal. As we move toward the final part of our study, let's hold on to this image, the soul standing at the gates of the spiritual world, not as a stranger, but as a long-awaited guest returning to a celebration of life. The just do not die. They simply return home. As we reach the conclusion of our study on the death of the just, from the book Heaven and Hell, we are left with a profound question. What is the secret to such a peaceful transition? Allan Kardec, through the communications of these happy spirits, shows us that the end of life is not a mystery to be feared, but a harvest to be celebrated. In this final part of our series, we reflect on the common thread that unites all these elevated souls, the complete absence of attachment to material vanities, and a deep, unwavering trust in the goodness of God. When we read about the passing of a righteous person, we notice that the separation begins long before the heart stops beating. For the spirit who has cultivated goodness, the fluidic ties that bind the soul to the body are loose, fragile, and ready to be released. There is no struggle, no agony in the sense of spiritual pain. Instead, there is a gentle fading of the physical senses and a brilliant awakening of the spiritual ones. Kardec reminds us that the just are not necessarily those who performed grand, heroic deeds visible to all the world. Often they were individuals who fulfilled their humble duties with love, who bore their crosses without murmuring, and who treated every neighbor as a brother. Their happiness in the afterlife is simply the natural consequence of the peace they carried within their own consciences. This is the great lesson of the Heaven and Hell. It demystifies the Judgment Day. We learn that we are our own judges. Each act of charity, each moment of patience, and each effort to overcome our shadows acts as a thinning of the veil. For the happy spirit, death is not a departure into the unknown. It is a return to a home they never truly forgot. As we close this chapter, let us carry this certainty in our hearts. Our future state is being built right now, in the present moment. The serenity we see in the death of the just is available to all of us. It doesn't require wealth or status, only a sincere heart and the daily practice of the gospel. May the examples we've shared over these 5 parts inspire you to live with more lightness, to love without conditions, and to view the inevitable transition of the soul not as a sunset, but as the dawn of a much brighter day. Study Kardec, practice the teachings of Jesus, And remember, life is eternal, and love is the only bridge that carries us safely to the other side. Peace be with you all, and until our next study.